Tonight on All In.
We have the votes and we're ready to impeach.
Republicans take another run at impeachment as New York votes to replace a disgraced MAGA member.
I actually went to school on a volleyball scholarship.
You did? Tonight, what we know about the fate of impeachment and the MAGA House.
We're not the problem. The problem is on the extreme MAGA Republican side.
Then how Jack Smith is responding to Trump's latest attempt to delay his trial, and how Vladimir Putin's greatest investment keeps paying dividends as Republicans vow to block Ukraine aid on the orders of Donald Trump.
For God's sake, it's dumb, it's shameful, it's dangerous, it's un-American.
When All In starts right now. Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. We're in the midst of a lot of late-breaking news this evening. In just 1 hour from now, polls will close in the highly contested special election in New York's 3rd congressional district. That is a race to replace the disgraced former Republican Congressman George Santos. But now we begin on Capitol Hill, where just moments ago, the current House majority, as slim as they come, narrowly approved an impeachment of President Joe Biden's Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas by exactly 1 vote along party lines with bipartisan opposition. This is, frankly, a purely political stunt, pretty lame one at that. There have been no high crimes or misdemeanors committed by the secretary, or even, to be honest, really alleged. There is almost zero chance he will face conviction in the Democratic Senate. In a new statement, President Biden slammed the impeachment, writing, quote, "History will not look kindly on House Republicans for their blatant act of unconstitutional partisanship that has targeted an honorable public servant in order to play petty political games." This, of course, was their second attempt to impeach Mayorkas after the first vote failed in spectacular fashion last week. That vote failed in large part because the unruling House Republican Conference has one of the narrowest majorities in history. And just 1 hour from now at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, we're going to see if that narrow MAGA majority will expand its numbers by 1 or shrink even further when polls will close in one of the most fiercely contested and expensive congressional special elections in recent memory. New York's 3rd congressional district, which represents parts of Queens and New York City and the New York suburbs on Long Island, voted for President Joe Biden by 10 points back in 2020. The district has been trending red. That is in part because the lines of the district were redrawn after the 2020 census to be slightly less favorable to Democrats. In 2022, it flipped for Republican gubernatorial candidate Lee Zeldin by a margin of 12 points. And quite infamously, it also elected a guy you might remember, Republican George Santos, to Congress by a little under 8 points. Santos, of course, lasted less than a year in office before suffering one of the most embarrassing flameouts in American political history. Former congressman fabricated nearly every aspect of his biography, best as we can tell. He's currently facing trial this year on 23 felony charges related to what prosecutors say are multiple schemes and grifts, including insurance fraud, campaign finance fraud, credit card fraud, and lying to Congress. Santos has pleaded not guilty to all the charges. He now makes a living by selling custom videos on Cameo. In his place, Republicans are running relative newcomer Mazi Pilip. And on paper, she has a great Republican biography, mother of 7, former member of the Israeli Defense Forces. In reality, Pilip has proven to be a stilted candidate, which may be why she is more or less running from the press. For their part, the Democrats are running a familiar face in Tom Suozzi. He used to represent the district before he left it back in 2022 for an unsuccessful run for governor. And on the one hand, this is just one House race, and whoever wins it will have to run again in November. They just get it for 9 months. But because this is the first big contest of this election year, it has generated a significant amount of attention. Both sides have spent a combined $22 million on advertising, the majority of which has come from groups supporting Suozzi. It is likely to be a very, very close race. Democrats are anxious, eager to read a lot into tonight's results, but perhaps it should be Republicans who are nervous. Because on the day of the election, you have a perfect example of the dysfunction of this House Republican conference that Mazi Pilip is seeking to join. The new stunt impeachment of Secretary Mayorkas does nothing to actually improve the situation at the border or the lives of the country. Republicans don't actually want to fix the problems at the border. We know this because literally within the last week and a half, they killed a very conservative and aggressive bipartisan immigration bill last week after Donald Trump issued the order for them to do so. The thing is, it's always easy to identify problems, border, crime, etc. It's much harder to actually come up with solutions, which is why Mazi Pilip or any other fellow Republicans aren't actually offering any, at least at the moment. It remains to be seen as if there will be any actual electoral consequences for that. Steve Kornacki joins me now at the big board. Steve, everyone says this is going to be a tight race.
It's looking that way just based certainly on the polling coming into it. And it's a high interest race, too, certainly based on the numbers we saw from people participating in early voting, voting by mail, and then the indications we're getting from the various reports today about same day voter turnout, even with the snowstorm you've probably heard all about that is on Long Island today. So a couple things to look for here. And at 9 o'clock Eastern is when the polls are going to close. Show you the district here. This is the Nassau County, Long Island portion of it. It's going to be about 80% of the vote is going to come out of the Nassau County, classic suburbia, a lot of New York commuters here, bedroom communities. And then the other 20% or so is actually going to come from the New York City portion of the district. This is the far edges of Queens. It's really kind of suburban Queens, if you will. So that's sort of the composition of the district here. Now, you take a look. You were mentioning that voting history in 2022. This was the Santos victory over the Democrat. It was about a 7-point victory there, 7.5-point victory. And under these same lines, these were redrawn lines, as you mentioned, after 2020. Under these same lines, Biden would have won this district by 8 points. So you've got a Biden 8 margin under these lines to a Santos plus 7.5 margin. That was a swing between 2020 and 2022. Essentially, what changed in the redistricting is this portion of the district is new. It's more blue collar. It's like Massapequa. Levittown is down in this sort of southern portion of the district. This is new. It's more Republican. Also, more parts of Queens were added to the district in redistricting. And while you see Democratic blue right there, it actually, this is an interesting thing to watch for tonight, it much less blue in 2022 than in 2020. And one of the least blue parts of New York City, there's a high Asian American population in here that really seemed to shift away from the Democrats in some pretty strong numbers in 2022. So polls are going to close at 9 o'clock. What we expect is going to happen is that the early vote, which took place a week or so before the election, and the mail-in vote is going to be reported out first. Those are the numbers we're going to get initially. And based on the registration of the ballots that's been reported publicly and just the history that we know about early voting and mail voting, I think you can expect the early numbers are going to be the best that Tom Suozzi, the Democrat, gets. And the question is going to be from that early vote, from that mail vote, how much does he fall off? How well does Mazi Pilip do on the same day vote today? Because that's how Republicans, when they win elections, typically it is with the same day vote. And that certainly seems to be the Republican strategy here, is to rack up as many votes as they can on Election Day. And again, some indications that maybe that turnout on Election Day, a lot of Republican voters waiting till today to do that. So you expect a big Democratic lead early. And the question is, can Pilip erase all of it and eventually move ahead herself?
All right, Steve Kornacki, we will be checking in with you throughout the night once the polls close, so you don't go anywhere, and we won't either. I want to bring in Sahil Kapoor, senior national political reporter for NBC News, reporting live from an election night watch party for the district's Democratic candidate, Tom Suozzi. Sahil, how do things look on the ground there from the Suozzi campaign's perspective?
Hey, Chris. Well, there's less than an hour to go before polls close. The vibe over here at this Tom Suozzi watch party is still early. The candidate has not arrived yet. It's just starting to get going. And the campaign tells me it feels good today, but it believes these last few hours are crucial before 9 p.m. when the polls close, because turnout this morning was very slow. It was a very aggressive winter storm that made the roads borderline undrivable. But the snow stopped falling sometime in around mid-afternoon. And at least in the polling place that I spent most of the day at, voters started piling in. The turnout seemed to grow pretty substantially around that time, and we've heard anecdotal evidence from around this district that that was the case as well. Now, Mazi Pilip's team was very nervous this morning as a result, because of that low turnout, because as Steve just pointed out, Republicans are Election Day voters. They're relying heavily on Election Day turnout to try to overcompensate or to try to beat back what is likely to be a big Tom Suozzi advantage early on. The fact that turnout has picked up in their view as well, in Mazi Pilip's camp's view as well, gives them some reason for hope. But they still see her as the underdog. They still describe her as the underdog because she's less known. She's newer to politics. She doesn't have the kind of name ID as Tom Suozzi does. The biggest issue to watch in this race, Chris, is migration. You cannot turn on the TV without seeing a bombardment of ads from both campaigns on this issue. Mazi Pilip sees this as her ticket to victory. Republicans keep pounding Tom Suozzi on the air, trying to tie him to the left, to the squad on the issue of the border. He has rejected this, and he is taking this pretty seriously, countering, saying that he supports this bipartisan deal to toughen border and asylum laws, that Mazi Pilip opposes it, in his view, because she's taking orders from Donald Trump, because she's tied to the extremists of her party, in his view, because she doesn't want to fix the problem. She just wants to use it for politics. This is a fascinating early test of that Democratic argument to try to go on offense with the border. If it can work here, it could probably work in other suburban swing districts. This is a bellwether for many other battlegrounds across the country. If Tom Suozzi can pull this off and maybe even fight that to a draw, he's never going to win on that issue, but if he can neutralize that advantage for Republicans, it could have huge ramifications, not only tonight for this result, but in the battle for the House of Representatives this fall, and maybe even for the presidential election, given how closely these two candidates track their national parties' positions, the Biden and Trump positions on immigration. Chris.
All right, Saul Kapoor, thank you very much. Jennifer Palmieri served as the White House Communications Director for President Barack Obama as the 2016 Hillary Clinton campaign's Communications Director. She's now the co-host of MSNBC's How to Win 2024 podcast, and she joins me now. So there's sort of two things I'm keeping in mind. One is there's a lot that's sui generis about this race. The Santos factor, right? I mean, that was just a real
bizarre thing.
We hope not replicable.
Yeah.
A district that's actually been moving, the New York suburbs and New York specifically sort of moved in different ways than the rest of the country. You've got polling that shows in our most recent poll, Suozzi up by 4 points, but a lot of people think it's going to be neck and neck.
Yeah.
The one place that I think there's national lessons is what Sahil said. And I'm curious if you think, I think a lot of Democrats thought Trump killing the border deal was a gift.
Right.
And you have to use that gift in this kind of situation.
Right. So I think that, and there was a poll recently that showed that people blame Biden more for the bill collapsing than Trump, which is super frustrating for Democrats like me. But the margin was not as big as it normally is for Biden for Trump having, being strong on the border as opposed to Biden. So I think that Sahil's right. If Suozzi, and if you live in this area, it is all you see is, and Suozzi pushing back on, he is doing ads on the border. It's not just Pilip going after him. So if he wins, and it is a tough district to win, even though he represented before, I think that it will show Democrats you can fight this out, but you have to be really aggressive about it. I mean, she attacked him. He put something back on the air to defend himself. He made a calculation to spend a lot of money on the border. I don't think, though, but it's not like the suburbs of Atlanta or the suburbs of of Philadelphia here for this race. This is an important race for whether or not Hakeem Jeffries becomes speaker. I'm not sure how important it is, what it tells us really about Biden, because abortion in blue states, it's hard to, I think it's a big issue.
I see what you're saying.
You know what I mean? It's a big issue in states where people think abortion is abortion rights are under threat. But they don't feel that way. Suozzi is going after her on abortion. I don't know if it's really hitting people in New York because nobody in New York thinks, maybe wrongly, that abortion rights are at stake. So, Suozzi's not able to use that as much.
That's a great point. So, one of your hypotheses, which I think was borne out a little bit in 2022, is that the salience of abortion, which is the issue that Democrats right now probably lead the most on, is higher in states where, at a state level, it's been banned and people have suffered the tangible effects of Roe, as opposed to a state like New York, which has not banned abortion.
Right, or that they feel that it's a purple state or it's a red state.
It could go either way.
Like Michigan or Pennsylvania or Georgia. Right. So these states. So it is. So he's using that as an issue, but. I don't know that I just don't know that it's going to break through the same way.
Well, she's also sort of straddled it. I mean, we played a clip of her saying she's pro-life and she thinks women should be able to choose.
Right.
So I got to put on each.
She's like,
I got to put on each. Now, the other thing, to stay with this immigration question, right? So I think if you looked at it from afar and you're just talking about issue salience, and I had, Pluff here the other night who made a funny line about you don't get to just play offense, right? You got to play defense in a campaign. So from an issue salience perspective, it's like a campaign totally fought on the terrain of who's going to be tougher on stopping the migrants from coming. That's a very reactionary terrain. Like, that is generally not where you're going to favor a Democrat. And I think actually is a real problem with the national political discourse.
Right.
That's another thing. Republicans want to keep this issue as the most salient issue, which is why Trump killed the border bill. It's why they're impeaching Mayorkas. And this question of like how much you can, what to do with that is sort of the big
right. I mean, I think that it's hard in New York because it is right in your face in New York City. Like the migrant issue is just huge there. Suozzi spent a lot of time on it. I mean, it did feel like he was trying to make he was on defense and he tried to make it offense.
Yeah.
He uses abortion rights as offense against her. I think that the best Democrats can probably do is fight this to a draw. And I think the president I go to the border. I would go to the border.
Yeah.
And I would go to the border and I would say, this is how many border agents we have here. It's more than any other president has in history. This is the rate of deportations.
At the president
and just the president do that. People can draft off of him. I don't think that it's going to, you're not going to catch Republicans on this.
You still have that salience dilemma though, right?
Yes, you do. Right. You're not going but you can try to blunt the issue some. You can try to close the gap some that it's not as foremost in people's minds.
One thing that's also interesting to me is just that is the one-way ratchet on crime, which drives me a little crazy. Yeah. So in 2022, that there was all of those New York races were about crime. Like totally about crime, right? And at that point, it was the case that violent crime was up in Metro New York. Right. So, okay, that's democracy. A bad thing's happening, more of it. Crime's down 23% in New York City this year. Weirdly, it doesn't seem to be an issue.
It does. Right.
That's interesting. Like, that's a huge drop.
It's a huge drop. And they don't, and that's, what's interesting about this, I mean, in Long Island politics here are just different than anywhere else. You think of New York as a blue state, but it's, the salience of crime and immigration in this part of Long Island is a big deal and probably outsized anywhere else in the state and a lot of parts of the country. It's like, that is like that's what that disrespect, which is why Suozzi was thought to be such a good candidate for this. He won Nassau County as the executive in 2001 after 9/11. When terrorism was big and people were worried about crime and things like that, because he's like a tough on crime kind of Democrat. He is the guy you want in this situation. But it's still, it is not that, it's still, crime is still considered to be a big issue there.
Yeah. All right, Jennifer Palmieri, thank you very much. We will keep monitoring the happening in the race throughout the night. First, the latest timing on the battle to hold Trump accountable in court, plus new concerns about his mental acuity, if you could call it that, and how Putin is getting exactly what he paid for. That's all coming up. Stay with us. Tonight, we are awaiting special counsel Jack Smith's response to Donald Trump's latest effort to delay the most serious case against him. Yesterday, Trump and his lawyers asked the Supreme Court to block a lower court ruling that he is not immune from being prosecuted for his efforts to steal the 2020 election while president. Trump is trying to stack another delay on top of that legally dubious immunity claim. He wants the Supreme Court not to rule on this issue, but to wait to rule on it while he tries to get the full 11-judge bench of the appeals court to reconsider their decision. Then, only then, would he go to the Supreme Court for another appeal. Of course, this is the point. Delay, delay, delay. Now, the question it will all come down to one question. Are there enough partisan Trump appointees on the bench, specifically the Supreme Court bench, willing to collaborate with him and rob voters from knowing if he is guilty or innocent before Election Day? Joining me now is Leah Lippman. She's professor at University of Michigan Law School, co-host of the Strict Scrutiny podcast, along with Melissa Murray and my wife, Kate Shaw. It's good to have you, Leah. All right. So one thing that I've been struggling with here is that to track all this, you have to get in the procedural weeds, but it is in the procedural weeds where, like, the fate of the country's democratic decision-making is either going to live or die. What is Donald Trump asking for from the Supreme Court?
He's asking them for a stay, basically to put the D.C. Circuit's ruling on hold. And that ruling had allowed the proceedings in the trial court to kick back up again and potentially proceed to trial. He's not technically asking the Supreme Court, as you noted, to decide the immunity issue for itself. But I think it's likely that the Supreme Court will treat Trump's application for a stay as not just an application for a stay, but also a petition for certiorari, so that if it grants a stay, it will also indicate that it will hear the case and schedule it for argument, or at least that's my hope.
Yes. What he wants them to do is not that, right? What he wants them to do, just to spell this out, he wants to say, pause on that, and then we're going to go around, we're going to appeal. There's something called en banc review, right, which is we had a 3-judge panel. Now we want all of the D.C., all the 11 judges. Then they'll issue a ruling. Then if we lose that, then we'll come back to you. But they're not going to let him do that, right?
I certainly hope not. And, it's part of what is so audacious about his ask is he's not just, as you know, asking for a stay of that decision. He's also effectively asking the Supreme Court to modify the D.C. Circuit's mandate, because the D.C. Circuit had said, if you, Trump, ask the full en banc D.C. Circuit to review this decision, then that's not actually going to pause any proceedings in the district court. So it's not just that Trump is asking the Supreme Court to put the D.C. Circuit's decision on hold. He's asking them to do that, but also modify their mandate so that he can further run out the clock, not by asking the Supreme Court to issue the decision, but also the full D.C. Circuit to do so as well.
Okay, this is what I mean about the procedural weeds is where this lives or dies. So the point being that the 3 judges on the D.C. Circuit thought of this. They knew this. They basically said, look, dude, if you're going to try to add an extra step in here, which is this extra step of review, the clock starts ticking again. The mandate goes back to Judge Chutkan, and she starts the machine back up, and you start having pretrial motions and everything, and you start going towards a trial. So if you want to do that, fine, but it kicks up. So he's now going to the court and saying, stop them from doing that, pause that indefinitely while I appeal. So the other question, I guess, is what is the timeline for the court's decision now?
So we don't really know. The Supreme Court requested a response by the 20th. They could have done so more quickly. In the past, when the Trump administration had previously asked the Supreme Court to allow them to enforce the Migrant Protection Protocol, the Supreme Court requested a response within 3 days. And in the waning days of the Trump administration, when the Trump administration brought back the death penalty and they asked the Supreme Court to vacate a bunch of stays or pauses on execution, the court acted on those within days. So the Supreme Court requested a response by February 20th, but it's possible that Jack Smith will act more quickly and will file a response before that. And then that would allow, Donald Trump to file his reply and the Supreme Court to potentially act on the stay request and potentially treat it as a petition for certiorari, within a week, if not before. But they certainly did not act as though this is a very timely, urgent manner in a way that you would hope they recognize it is.
So that's an important thing. We're all reading tea leaves here, but you think that week does not indicate a court working at the speed and sense of urgency that they need to have.
It does not. It also isn't necessarily a super long time, but it also is not indicative of a court that understands this is a pure delay tactic, and every week, every day you give him is just increasing the risk that no trial is going to happen before the November election. And it's a little ironic because last week when the Supreme Court heard the disqualification argument, all we heard about was the court's obsession with the consequences of its ruling. They didn't care about what the text of the Constitution said. They didn't care what the history said. All they cared about was the possible implications of their ruling. And now the implications of their lack of urgency here is increasing the risk that Trump is not going to face any accountability in federal court for his actions related to January 6th before the election. So they should be made to own those consequences if they suddenly care about consequences some of the time in cases involving Donald Trump.
That's very well said, Leah Lippman. Thank you very much. All right. Dumb, shameful, and un-American. How Vladimir Putin's investment in Donald Trump is paying off. That's next. Donald Trump is very likely the Republican nominee for president. But he's more than just a candidate for office. He was actually the president before. People seem to have weirdly blocked it out, maybe because the whole thing was so traumatizing. But I assure you, he was there. He has an actual record. In that record, he did everything in office as president to undermine NATO, falsely painting it as a kind of protection racket in which the members were not paying him enough tribute, Trump even tried to get the U.S. to leave the alliance it founded altogether, according to multiple counts from people inside his administration. He also did everything he could to encourage Russian aggression against NATO. He famously sided with Russian President Vladimir Putin over his own intelligence agencies in public about Russian sabotage of the 2016 election. In that context, what he said this weekend was fully in line with his thinking, though unhinged even by his standards.
One of the presidents of a big country stood up and said, well, sir, if we don't pay and we're attacked by Russia, will you protect us? I said, you didn't pay? You're delinquent? He said, yes, let's say that happened. No, I would not protect you. In fact, I would encourage them to do whatever the hell they want. You got to pay. You got to pay your bills.
Now, first of all, it almost certainly didn't happen whenever he gives you like a yes sir story. But that aside, I was a little surprised to see several major news outlets fail to cite an obviously relevant piece of context, which is that Vladimir Putin is desperate to reach a negotiated settlement to steal a big chunk of Ukraine and is counting on the Republican Party in the U.S. to essentially aid him by cutting off aid to the beleaguered army of Ukraine, which is quite literally running out of ammunition. You know who did point out that context? President Biden, in brief remarks today that called for funding Ukraine and blasted Trump's comments.
Can you imagine a former president of the United States saying that? The whole world heard it. The worst thing is he means it. No other president in our history has ever bowed down to a Russian dictator. Well, let me say this as clearly as I can. I never will. For God's sake, it's dumb, it's shameful, it's dangerous, it's un-American.
And of course, Putin made an enormous investment in Trump personally, one that has been paying enormous dividends. He personally authorized a Russian operation to support a, quote, mentally unstable Donald Trump in the 2016 presidential election, as The Guardian put it. And now Trump effectively runs the Republican Party and is, for all the world, acting like a man who wants to continue pleasing his patron, Putin. He is going to do what he can to not only destroy the NATO alliance, but to make Ukrainian resistance to Russian aggression impossible. And Trump's comments are reverberating around the world, sending Europeans into equal parts rage and panic. Here at home, the Republican Party base is under Donald Trump's thumb. The Senate just overwhelmingly passed a bill to send military aid to Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson says his Trumpy majority is probably not even going to take the bill up for a vote in Congress. Just think about the incentives Putin had in 2016, the lengths that he went to help get Trump elected. Criminal sabotage of an American election. We've talked at length about how desperate Trump is to get back in the White House in hopes of eluding jail time and not, possibly dying in prison. Think about the stakes for Putin now as his war drags on and he desperately wants to end it with a Russian victory. And he has this one figure in his pocket singing his tune to half of America's two-party system. Which is to say, Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin need each other. With a coincidence of interests they hope will be stronger than NATO, stronger even than American democracy. Donald Trump has sort of been decomposing in front of our eyes for so long, it's hard to track the trajectory. I mean, he is, after all, the guy who talked about shining UV light inside people's orifices or alternately injecting bleach in order to cure them of COVID. He said that in public from the White House podium. I rewatched that clip today, and it drove home to me how all the stupidity, insanity, hostility of Donald Trump's term has been kind of sanded down to just goofy in a lot of people's remembrances. Today, in a column titled "Trump is Losing It," New York Times opinion columnist Jamelle Bouie compared Trump's feebleness to the breathless coverage of President Biden's age. Quote, Biden may be unable to do the job at some point in the future. Trump, it seems to me, already is. One of those is a lot more concerning than the other. And Jamelle Bouie, New York Times opinion columnist, joins me now. Jamelle, I liked your column, and one of the things, and this is a hobby horse of mine, so I'll just ride it for a moment, which is I do think that because people don't see him speak at length extemporaneously much anymore, they've lost sight of how completely incoherent he sounds when he does.
No, I think that's right. I think Trump's one of the great political advantages is that when he's out of public view, people just sort of like forget about him. Yeah. And everything they don't like about him is sort of not in their face. But if you just like watch his recent appearances at rallies, at public events and such, he's incoherent. And I believe it said in the column, he speaks in gibberish, and it's very striking to watch.
Yeah, say more about that, because I also he has always been sort of one for tangents, but it is notably harder to make your way through the logic of what he is saying than it was even a few years ago, I find.
I agree. There's one clip I watched of him attempting to explain a missile defense system, and he goes from sort of like a relatively cogent sort of like, we build these things for other countries into what took me a sec to really figure out what he was saying, like a description of how it works, but in sort of the kind of elliptical, nonsensical Trump fashion. It was very strange to watch. And I imagine I've been to my fair share of Trump rallies. I imagine that in the moment, especially if you're there as a supporter, it kind of just flies over you. But I have to imagine that someone who just doesn't really think much about Trump and you just plop them right there and you said, try to make sense of this, it would be hard. And certainly if the current president were sort of speaking in that manner, it would be a legitimate scandal.
There's also the fact that, again, there's always a certain amount of incoherence baked in, that it's hard to gauge over time. I mean, part of this because, look, when you look at Donald Trump from the 1990s, it's clear, right, that he's aged considerably. And that same is true of Joe Biden. When you look at Joe Biden as a senator, when he's 40 or 45, like, he's a much younger man and he speaks very differently, considerably. But Trump saying nonsense and incoherent things has been such a, again, it's like so many things about him that seems baked in and thus unremarkable and then thus not a news story.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a real dynamic. That is the dynamic. And I find it troubling because, as you mentioned earlier, he was president.
Yes.
And it seems so strange to me that he has discussed so much coverage of him talks, like, essentially speculation. But no, he was president of the United States for 4 years. I remember it. I saw it. And his NATO riff over the weekend, that would be troubling even for just a candidate, but he was president and he should know, and treating it as if it's like, oh, that's just Trump, doing his thing. My view is, no, that's not just Trump doing his thing. That's the former president of the United States, demonstrating not even that he has like a difference of opinion with regards to NATO, but that he doesn't understand what the thing is.
Yes. I think at many basic levels, he does not understand the most basic things of health insurance, what Medicare is, the difference between Medicare and Medicaid, like basic things that you would expect a president. But we also saw, to me, the big thing that we've blocked out is COVID, because we saw how that lack of knowledge, curiosity, that incoherence all came together in the response, in the ludicrous things from the White House, the inability to actually process and make decisions about new information to a tangible effect in terms of how bad the response was. And again, that was where it all happened, and it all happened before us. But I do think people have blocked it out.
Trump has gotten some kind of COVID mulligan that, that's just, yes, who could have predicted the pandemic? But here's the thing. The job of the presidency is being prepared for crises. That's all it is, right? We judge presidents historically over how they handle crises. As you know, I'm someone who's very interested in 19th century history. The reason we think of James Buchanan as a failed president is because he was met with a crisis, mounting secession talk, and he failed to handle it or deal with it in a way that helped the country survive. Donald Trump faced a crisis, and that's the job. And he failed to handle it. And so it's strange that so many Americans, and I think a lot of coverage, has given him a mulligan as if it doesn't count. No, this is precisely the thing that counts the most.
I could not agree more about it. This is a recurring theme we actually talked about on my podcast, Why Is This Happening, this week with Eric Kleinenberg, who's got a new book out about that year, about 2020, and we're revisiting it, which, again, people have blocked out for totally understandable reasons of emotional health. But speaking to that mulligan, I think it's really important to re-examine. Jamelle Bouie, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, we're just minutes now away from the polls closing in that New York 3rd Congressional District special election, where Democrats have pulled out all the stops to replace George Santos. A fellow New York Democrat, New York Congressman Dan Goldman, joins me on that next. Polls in New York's 3rd congressional district race on the northwest section of Long Island close in just about 7 minutes with the razor-thin Republican majority in the House. The entire Democratic Party has really put everything into this race. So has the local Republican Party and national Republicans. But a late complicating factor is the intense snowstorm that hit the New York metro area late last night and today, potentially impacting turnout, although that has eased. As you watch the numbers come in, remember the early results will likely skew Democratic because of the Republican distrust of early voting. Thanks to the snow, how tonight plays out is still very much up in the air. Joining me now is Congressman Dan Goldman, Democrat in New York's 10th district. He led the effort to expel George Santos, a successful effort that has resulted in tonight's special. Congressman, I want to ask you about New York 3, but first I just want to ask you about what happened in the House today, where there was a vote, the second vote to impeach Alejandro Mayorkas, which passed by a one vote margin, 3 Republicans voting against, all Democrats voting against, Republicans passing it. What do you think about what happened in your chamber just a few hours ago?
I think it's shameful, and it's just a doubling down on a political stunt that gets nothing done and is purely designed to provide election fodder for Donald Trump and the Republicans. Secretary Mayorkas has done what he can do within the bounds of legislation, and the fact that these House Republicans refuse to support a bipartisan legislation that came out of the Senate and instead want to use this political stunt to impeach a Secretary of Homeland Security for essentially a policy dispute at best demeans and debases not only the Constitution, but this institution itself, the House of Representatives.
It also seems, I mean, you've got a strange sort of confluence, right, where this border deal that was worked out in the Senate after 4 months of negotiations gets killed by a combination of basically Donald Trump and Mike Johnson. Then this vote, now Mike Johnson's saying he's not going to pass anything unless he gets some border deal. But they tried a border deal and that got ripped up. Like, it seems a little bit like you guys are stuck like a Roomba in the corner of a room.
Well, let's not say you guys, because
we all are. Yes, that's true.
Interested in working out bipartisan agreement, and we support the national security, the international security supplemental that's come over from the Senate. President Biden went to great lengths to forge a compromise that Secretary Mayorkas, by the way, was very involved in negotiating while he was being impeached.
Right. That border bill.
Yeah, what we are seeing is the House Republicans said we're not doing foreign aid unless we do the border. So the Senate did the border in a bipartisan way. And then Donald Trump came over the top and said, no, we don't actually want to do the border. So now they just do the foreign aid. Then it comes back to the House and the House says, wait. We can't do foreign aid without addressing the border, as if the last 4 months did not just happen. It is cynicism and hypocrisy at its zenith, Chris, and it is a reflection of today's do-nothing Republican Party.
So you and your colleagues have been very invested in this race in New York 3. Obviously, it would narrow that very slim majority even further. What's your sense of the politics of this race at this moment, particularly in a state where Democrats really underperformed in 2022 relative to the rest of the country?
Look, I think the New York 3 is a very emblematic district of the 5 or 6 swing districts in New York, where there are many issues that are specific to kind of the ring around New York City. The immigration issues and the migrant crisis is on top of everyone's mind, including ours and especially Tom Suozzi's. The issues related to taxes are high on the list of everyone's mind, and Tom Suozzi has been a leader in trying to reduce property taxes in New York 3. And so what we have effectively is somebody running to replace George Santos from his same party who has shady financial disclosures, who has inconsistent and flip-flopping positions on abortion, on assault weapons, on border, on Donald Trump, but ultimately has made it very clear that she will just be a rubber stamp to Mike Johnson and Donald Trump, because she also opposed the bipartisan border security legislation. And she also has said that she will follow Donald Trump and supports Donald Trump and Mike Johnson. On the other hand, you have Tom Suozzi, who was a 3-term congressman from this district, has a history of bipartisanship and represents this district as well as anyone possibly could. And it's just an interesting time. It's sort of a snapshot in time in our national discussion where a lot of these issues are swept to the side and it becomes a purely national election. And that's part of the reason why the Republican candidate has been able to hide for 2 months and no one even knows what her real positions are because this has been nationalized.
There's one local issue I just want to ask you about because it has been a national issue, which is crime. And it was a huge issue in 2022. And I was saying this earlier in the show, but in 2022, like, crime was going up. Like, the measurements we had of it, violent crime had increased in 2020 and 2021, property crime increased. Is there a way to just... do people realize that crime in New York City is down 23% this year, which is one of the most significant year-over-year drops ever recorded in the city? I know that no one's supposed to pay attention when it goes down, but it just feels like maybe people should know that.
You know, there are two components, I think, to public safety. One is the data, which you are correct, is going down, and the other is how people feel. You cannot convince people that what they're feeling is wrong because you give them data. But a lot of what is on people's minds as it comes to public safety is the degree of randomness of crime. The more random it is, the more unsafe it feels. If it's between known associates, for example, then it doesn't feel like it might affect me. And so I think there is a lag with the data where people will now start to feel it and feel more secure. And I think that we as Democrats have put forward and need to put forward more aggressive solutions to not only make sure that we are keeping our streets safe, that we are keeping violent criminals off the streets, but also that we're helping other people who may just touch the system momentarily and providing them with the resources and diversion programs so that we can keep people out of jail. And that's the Democratic message, which is both justice, security, and equality.
And about $100 million in police overtime this year. Congressman Dan Coleman, thank you very much. I appreciate it. That does it for All In. You can catch us every weeknight at 8 o'clock on MSNBC. Don't forget to like us on Facebook. That's facebook.com/allinwithchris.